Is Mookie Betts ever going to close the gap on Mike Trout hobby-wise?
No, never. Never. He will never do it. Mookie Betts could become a better overall around player. He could finish his career with better stats than Mike Trout. But I do not believe it's going to be possible for him to catch up with Mike Trout in the hobby. We talked about this in the last episode. I feel like hobby relevance, stats, and the sport relevance, how great you are in the sport, doesn't always compute. It doesn't always transfer over to the hobby. I think Mike Trout, and I'm going to give you a stat right off the bat. We're not wasting time with data. I'm going to give you a stat and tell you why I believe this is not going to change. The numbers are not going to lie. I did some homework. Blowout Forum, in my opinion, is a place where a lot of folks go to learn about the Halloween cards. Am I right in that?
100%.
Yeah. Blowout Forum is sort of like the Bible for the hobby. It goes back a long way, and you could sort of like take an apple to apples approach a lot of times, or even an orange to orange, however you want to look at it, to go, all right, I'm going to learn about what's a fake auto, all the hobby scams. I can learn about a player's collectability. I can learn about the player's cards, what to collect, what cards to buy, what to target, PSA versus BGS crossover percentages, man, everything. So I obviously go, okay, if I want to learn about who is more relevant in the hobby, I'm going to go to Blowout to learn this. If you go to Blowout forums, you're going to find that there's a Blowout forum page, like a perennial page that was started in 2018 for Mookie Betts. How many pages do you think that forum has at this point? That's been going since 2018. How many pages do you think there are?
Well, he's the second best player. Well, I'd say second best player in the game, but now you've got Ohtani. And Trout's no longer the best player in the game. But that should warrant Mookie Betts standing 64 career Fangraphs WAR. I mean, he'd have to be over 100 pages, 100 150 pages.
126 pages.
Okay.
126 pages. Okay. All right. Mike Trout has I know this because I held a lot of Mike Trout at one point until I just decided Griffey was the only guy I wanted to be with. So Blowout Forum, he's the only guy I'm taking to the dance. Blowout Forum started in 2018. Same year. Mike Trout, same year. These both started at the same time. How many pages do you think his perennial thread has at this point, as of today?
So Betts is 126. So this has got to be around 500, 600?
888 pages.
Okay.
You know what that tells me, Phil? That tells me that Mike Trout has a deep, deep collector base. But if you go into that thread, what you're going to find that's interesting, if you dig into that thread, and I've done it for years now, there's a lot of detractors in there too. So he has this polarizing energy about him. There's people that say he's getting hurt. This is going to all blow up. There's people in there hoping that it all blows up for Mike Trout. But he still has that much interest in the hobby. Mookie Betts just doesn't.
On last week's episode, I wanted to just maybe clean up some of what the perception is of what I said about Mookie Betts. I was just saying he's not a great example of WAR translating to values at this point. I'm not saying that I'm bearish on him for the short term or long term, or that I don't think he's undervalued, because I kind of do at this point. I actually think he's one of the better buys, even though his stuff is up a little bit over the last few months. So again, if you look at the numbers, and we'll show a breakdown here that shows kind of career performance, Betts versus Trout. So Betts is 30 years old. Trout is 2 years older, 32 years old. And you see Betts has a career 64 WAR. Trout is 85. Home runs, 252 for Betts, 368 for Trout. OPS, quite a big difference right now. Career OPS 901 for Betts versus 994. That's almost a 100-point difference. OPS plus, I think Trout came into this year with maybe the highest career OPS plus for somebody with as many plate appearances as him. But and that's Scotty B's argument, one of his key arguments in why that Trout is going to go down as perhaps a top 5 to 10 player of all time still, and why he's still probably a good buy.
Yeah.
And why it's might be too early to give up on him given the injuries, given looks like the second half of the career won't be as good as the first half. But you're measuring him before the second half decline of his career is complete, right? So the OPS plus, it's based on how good you've been up till this point.
Mm-hmm.
With Barry Bonds, well, not a good example. With most players, after they turn 32, 33, if you snap their OPS plus at that point, career-wise, versus where it is after they retire, it's a different story. So you can't just project out that OPS plus for the rest of their career. But I think the point, the key point here, also probably a Scotty B argument, and one of my arguments is that you look at that peak, the peak performance, 3 MVPs, that's huge, right? 3 MVPs is enough to offset lack of postseason success. It's enough to offset not having a magnetic personality. It's enough to offset not having a ton of Instagram followers, not being super interesting, not having, eye-popping stats from a power perspective. He's never once hit over 50 home runs. He's only had 40 plus home runs 3 times. So looking at those peak years, 10.1 WAR in 2012, 10.2 WAR in 2013, 9.3 WAR in 2015, 9.5 WAR in 2018. I mean, that's just incredible. You look at like what Ronald Acuna is doing this year. Everybody thinks like this is like a ridiculous season. He's hitting 340. He's about to perhaps go 40 home runs, 70 stolen bases. He's flashy. He's athletic. He's not striking out. Yes, that's awesome. He's doing great. But is he even going to get to an 8 WAR? Now, some of that isn't helped by his defensive performance. The fact that he doesn't get good jumps on balls, the fact that he's currently rated a negative defender by a lot of metrics. But I think we can't really even compare Trout and Betts at this point because Trout is already the guy. He already was the guy. We've just flipped to another decade. Trout was the guy of the last decade.
Right.
And now Betts is kind of stuck in between in no man's land. It's almost like instead of arguing whether Betts can take the throne from Trout, what we're really looking at a situation is like, can he take the throne from Bryce Harper, who, by the way, is turning around his season?
Correct.
By the way, we talked about this, I think, in one of the recent episodes about how you have a higher floor built in if you came in as a top prospect, as somebody that came in with all this hype, all this fandom already, all these like pre-built expectations surrounding you. And how that benefits a guy like Vlad, who wouldn't be selling for nearly what he's selling for now, given his performance in the major leagues. A lot of it has to do with that pedigree, that initial floor. Helped Wander as well, and it helped Bryce Harper. So, unfortunately, and you can't take anything away from Betts here because if you really look into his numbers, like Rafael Devers has been in the league for this is going to be 18, 19. This is going to be his 6th year, basically 6.5 years, and he doesn't have a top 10 MVP finish. Mookie Betts, if he doesn't win the MVP this year, then he's going to have 3 number 2 finishes and 1 number 1 finish in MVP, which is very, very awesome. Again, 65 WAR, and sometimes small guys tend to, I wouldn't say break down, but sometimes their productivity goes down into the 30s. But I'll take his body, I'll take his health history over Trout any day. And with Trout, it's not just the injuries that are keeping him off the field. It's production isn't great. It's slipping. He's clearly declining. This year, WRC plus was the worst I believe it's been since his not very good rookie season, partial season, right? So again, Trout's the guy. You can't really compare the two. And didn't you have some data on the what their like first Bowman Chrome autographs are selling for?
Yeah, no, their first Bowman autographs. The autographs kind of tell an interesting story, and we're using the BGS 9.5 auto 10 as the baseline. That's our apples to apples comparison. I'm not the PSA 10. The PSA 10 and both cards are obviously a lower pop, so those numbers will be skewed differently, appropriately because of that. But using the BGS 9.5 auto base for both cards at this point in time, as of the most recent card ladder data that I pulled up, the pop is $715 on Mookie Betts for his base auto, and the last sale was $1,260. Comparatively to Mike Trout, his BGS 9.5 auto 10 base with a pop of $364 is trading at $7,200 as of the last sale. Let's take the multiplier up all the way to where, where I'm not going to use a superfractor, reds, or any of that. I'm just going to use the gold because I feel like gold's kind of an interesting gold. I think this is my personal opinion. I feel like the gold refractor is the card for the you're going to get a BGS or even a PSA first Bowman Chrome Auto. The gold's kind of the card you'd love to have. Mookie Betts has 41 of them graded at BGS 9.510. The last sale for $1,100-$250. I'm not going back and looking at 2021 20 prices. Just the recent sale, $11,250. And the gold for Mike Trout, a pop of 34, a little bit less. The last sale was for $68,400. I mean, that's almost like 4 times. That is really, really difficult to overcome. That number, I don't think it's just the MVPs, Phil. I don't think it's just the MVPs. I think Mike Trout has a collector base that's so deep. And you see this with other players. You see it with LeBron. You see it with Michael Jordan, Kobe.
Right.
You get these players that just have a collector base that's so in their feet they're so dug in that
Trout had the benefit of being in the spotlight, being the clear, definitive top player in the game, while the hobby, I would argue, was hitting somewhat of a golden age of collecting in the 2015s through 2019s. And you're right. So the 3 MVPs, the peak performance, that's huge. That's what Trout needed to do to have that collectability. Griffey didn't need that. Griffey was able to gain collectability through other means than having that insane statistical peak, but he was still the top player in the game for a number of years. With Mookie Betts, the full book hasn't been written yet. There's still going to be some chapters that aren't there yet with Mookie Betts. The next 3 years are going to be huge for him. And he has the ability to be that top guy in the game, to then be at that same level of collectability. Will he ever reach Trout level? Still probably not, but he could close that gap. So what I'm saying is, like, they don't necessarily depend on one another.
Mm-hmm.
Trout and what he's done and the OPS plus and the peak argument, like it in whatever Betts does, like Trout's stuff could still definitely fall. It could still definitely get cheaper from where it is at now.
Mm-hmm.
And Betts stuff could go up, independent of what happens to Trout. So I definitely think the next few years are something to watch, because he's going to be sharing the spotlight with Ohtani. It's not going to be just Bryce Harper. It's going to be younger players, other types of players, other talented players. And then you've got all the new hyped players also that are going to be trying to take a piece out of that wallet share or market share, if you will.
I do think, though, it's interesting. You talk about catching up, though. I don't know if it necessarily matters. I feel like Trout has done enough. Trout was so good for a moment in time that he kind of already set it in stone, in my opinion. He already did it. It's like he's done.
I agree. When I say catch up, it's sort of semantics. When I say catch up, or if I say close the gap, I mean narrow the gap. I don't think it'll ever be close between those two.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's terrible for people that are buying bets now.
No,
I think that there's definitely room for bets to go up. And this is it's contingent more on Mookie's second half of his career more than it is on whatever Trout does.
Correct.
Trout's going to be here regardless.
The pressure's on him.
Mookie's not dependent on that, right? Mookie's an independent variable in himself, in my opinion. Okay.
Got it.
All right. Next subject. Let's talk about Ronald Acuna. Mr. Ronald Acuna. his prices are up a little bit, maybe not a lot of it over the last year, depending on kind of which index you want to look at. I'm noticing. I don't know if you understand like the differences of some of the types of indexes, but
Mhm.
card ladder and market movers are using different methodologies. So I think one of them might be using like a market cap index for the player values versus equal weighted, meaning that like the more expensive cards end up being weighted more
Right.
versus like all of them having like their percent change weighted the same across all cards, regardless of starting and ending value. But, anyways, it looks like Acuna hasn't gotten the huge bump that, say, like Aaron Judge did when he had this massive year last year, when his stuff just went nuts. Do you think that Ronald Acuna's stuff is currently undervalued, properly valued, or overvalued?
I think people are feeling a bit burned right now with Wander Franco, Fernando Tatis Jr., maybe even a little bit of Shohei Ohtani. There's a little bit of that afterburn, in my opinion. This isn't stat driven. This argument I'm going to make now is more emotional. I feel like people are just
Mhm.
burned out. They feel like if a player going to really become the guy, the price is going to dictate. That's my thought. I think that I think he's a good I picked him earlier in the year on the Luka Tiger when that was still existing with Daddy Rips, Mike Allen, great breaker. We both had picks when we had a show for a minute there, and he picked his player. I selected Ronald. I had Ronald Acuna as the NL MVP. I thought he was going to have a huge bounce back year. But is it something that's sustainable? I think people want to think about his injury history. Is it sustainable? Is this just a big year for him? Is he going to be able to put it together? His talent's there, but do you want to spend a lot of money on a player like that? His bigger stuff is selling though. I mean, his golds right now, his gold BGS 9.510 is at 15K as of last sale. Well, that's the value they're giving it. The BGS 95 Auto 10 gold refractor. They're saying the last sale on that one right now is $15,100. And that was on the
Just
17th.
happened this week. Yeah.
Yeah, 17th of September. Yeah. So
I think I actually know who won that. Somebody who was in the podcast with me,
nice.
actually, the Spitballin podcast. Yep.
I mean, if you're buying, I mean, I will say this: I feel good about golds because golds there's a crowd for golds. I think Acuna is going to be really good. I think he's a great buy right now. I mean, obviously we don't make picks, right? But I think
You can say it. You can say it. I don't care.
Yeah, I mean he's undervalued. Okay, here's what I like about Acuna. Same thing as about Trout. Well, not the same thing as Trout. Acuna is electric. He's like Julio. He's got even though Otani's not as electric, but he's got this like phenom mentality. His aura about him. Acuna is exciting. He's taunting the crowd. He's bigger than he's in commercials. He's marketable. I think that matters. I think if there's a video game, I think the show next year, MLB The Show for PlayStation 5, is going to have Acuna on the cover. That matters. That stuff matters to kids. It matters to us. We care about that. We want a flashy player that wears gold chains. Like, that's cool. That makes him cool. That makes him collectible.
Yeah. So I agree with you to an extent. My viewpoint's a little different, but so this whole like people want to see a little bit more. Is this truly sustainable? I mean, the last productive full season he had was in 2019. I guess 2020 is a partial season, but so most people look back at 2019. And maybe he would have got injured if 2020 had 150 plus games in it. Who knows? But he looked really promising in 2020. That's for sure. So I think I look at all of, and this was a topic that was discussed at that Spitballin podcast, by the way, and I'll be in the next one. I wasn't able to join episode number 2. I look back at like what happened when he hurt his knee in 2021, and a few of the guys on the podcast made a note that like his stuff didn't really go down as much as it would with like a typical season-ending injury. And this is one that Took him over a full year to rebound from. His power was way down last year. A lot of people think he was also the recipient of some bad luck, right? But
Mhm.
I mean, whether you're a prospector, whether you buy the numbers or not, or you're just an eye test guy, I mean, like that season, it was just what fell well short of people's expectations. Younger guy, more athletic. For most of that season, he was a year removed from the ACL repair, right? So it's like, all right, what are you going to give us? But like the values didn't really drop much. They dropped a little, but you have to look at like returns relative to the market versus just like absolute returns. Because if the market's going down, if the market went down 30% and Acuna went down 20%, to me that's pretty good. He outperformed the market, right? Of all modern cards or ultra modern cards, whatever. So what I think happened is, and one of the reasons why I sold a Acuna card last year, the Sapphire PSA 10. There's two reasons why I sold it. One, I didn't think it was the right card. I thought the market was falling out of favor with base cards. Even though it's a Sapphire card, even though it's a beautiful one, I
Mhm.
struggle with this one. I did struggle with this one. And if it wasn't for the second reason, I worried about, even if he had a good season the next year, I didn't think it would be this good. But even if he had a good season in 2023, I thought there would be a lot of speculators that were holding his cards still, waiting for a moment to sell. So call it maybe scared money. So a window of time, let's see him prove himself. If MVP is baked in, he already came in as probably top one or two in the league to win MVP, but still, that's still 5-1 or 6-1. That still means that it's more likely than not that he doesn't win because the field has that higher percentage implied odds, right? Still, it's most likely not going to happen. But they see late May, like, oh my, like this is the real Acuna,
Right.
cutting down his strikeouts, 340 average, or wherever he was at the time. The home runs took a little bit longer to kind of build up. I think in April it was a little bit of a kind of slower power month, especially the first few weeks. But when that MVP was baked in, people started to sell. And that pressure, that selling pressure, prevented his stuff from going parabolic. So if you compare that to Aaron Judge in 2022 last year, there were no speculators holding his cards when that season started to get pretty ridiculous. The speculators had already sold shortly after his rookie season, probably, when he
Hmm.
won or he came in second for MVP, but he had that pretty historic rookie season, right? 2017, and he lost to Altuve. Um, so I think, there was a lot built in for Acuna, a lot of people looking to exit, a lot of short-term speculator type money versus with Judge to start the season, probably had mostly Yankee collectors that were still holding his cards at that point, a few years, multiple years after that really awesome rookie season. So I think, to your point, so circling back to where you stand, I do think that if he does something similar next year, because we've already bled out those speculators and the non-believers and the people that maybe were over leveraged, we're just waiting for a time to exit. I think because those people are gone and a lot of the long-term believers are now in,
Yeah.
um, there's upside for those speculators to come back next year and for more people to come back, collectors and investors, that all of a sudden, like to me and you, like our long-term expectations of Acuna haven't really changed too much based on this season. I see a skills change. I see the strikeouts go down and
Yeah.
match his walk number. I see that being okay. This is a material indicator for me that, wow, like Acuna is probably a bit more special than I thought. I think the two of us probably knew a few years ago that he was capable of a season like this, um, minus the stolen bases. But the stolen bases don't matter so much. And I'll actually bring up a graphic here. Um, there are a number of guys that are on pace for 30-30 this year. The stolen bases at 70 almost mean like 50 or 55 in a regular season because of the changes they made to the rules. So it, I don't want to take away something that nobody else has ever done. I think you had brought this up, Dennis, before the show, that
Mhm.
either nobody's ever gone 30-60 or nobody's ever gone 40-60, which is something he's about to do if he hits one more home run.
Right.
So that's pretty awesome. But the stolen bases don't mean what they usually do. So Ronald Acuna, 7 or 8 WAR. That's great. I think most people that watched him from the start knew he was capable of putting up an 8 WAR season. But if he does it again, then my long-term expectations of him versus a Juan Soto, I start to really change them in my pecking order for long-term expectation. This is what it's all about, right? Like when Jeremy Pena went off in the ALCS and World Series a few years back or last year, that didn't affect anything I didn't already know about Jeremy Pena. I knew he was capable of going on hot streaks. So I questioned, like, why did his stuff like 3 to 5x? I know it's gonna be a short-term move, and especially for somebody like me who doesn't buy into postseason accolades, really attributing to your long-term value. My theory was he's going right back down where he started. This is ridiculous because we didn't learn anything new about him. At least that was my opinion, right? So with Acuna, if he does this twice, then I'm like, okay, it's consistency, it's health on top of elite production. Then I start to, again, like, wow, he is better. He is better than Juan Soto. He is more likely to have a better career than Juan Soto, even though those guys are kind of tough to compare.
I mean, I think I'm going to have to disagree with you with postseason success. I think if Acuna is able, because that's a big differentiator between Acuna and Trout and a lot of these players. Acuna is on a winning baseball team. The Braves are, you got Matt Olson on that team hitting 51 home runs. I mean, you have an incredible baseball team in Atlanta. That's a team that's probably going to win the World Series, in my opinion. I don't think anyone's going to beat them. I think they're the team that takes it all away. Now you're going to have Acuna playing top-notch baseball. He's going to take an amazing regular season. He's going to match that with a great postseason. He's going to become the face of baseball if he can do that. Right? He's, like I said, he's marketable. He's flashy. Now he's on the big stage. He's a postseason baseball player coming off an incredible year. And here's the fun thing about postseason baseball. Postseason baseball, and you and I both know this, the whole game matters. You watch the whole game. Base running, base stealing, that's a big deal. A really fast, flashy player sliding in head first, his helmet popping off, the hair everywhere, the chain flopping around. Kids are going to think it's the coolest thing. He's going to be cool. It's going to look cool. His team's going to be winning. That's going to be contagious. I do think the postseason will have an impact on his card prices. I think you're going to see a punch in his prices in the postseason. And I don't think they go down postseason. I think you're right. You make a really good point. I never thought about people exiting and then having the leftovers be the long-term believers or people that bought in going, yes, long-term. That's going to help him if he has another great season next year and takes this year the postseason success and next year keeps going. Yeah, he's an incredible player. There's incredible opportunity there.
One of Ronald Acuna or Mookie Betts will not win the MVP this year in the National League. Whichever one does not, in my opinion, their stuff is going to soften by 10 to 30% immediately afterwards. Whichever one doesn't win is the one that's the best buying opportunity, whether it be Acuna or Betts. Because I think it makes the one that doesn't win undervalued, even though I believe that MVPs matter a lot for the hobby. They matter for the Hall of Fame. The seasons outside of the MVP should speak for themselves.
But what if whoever doesn't win the MVP goes on and has a great postseason and wins the World Series?
Mookie's already won a couple of those, so at this point it's like diminishing returns. If Acuna wins it, so Acuna, like rewriting the narrative of being the guy that the team didn't need, they actually got a lot better without him, even though he was kind of carrying them for the first few months of the season before he got injured.
Right.
It could be interesting. There's always going to be exceptions to the rule. I could see the short-term spike being larger for Acuna because of that. Will there be a long-term spike? Well, it's going to be impossible to quantify.
There's nothing better than playoff baseball.